Girivardhari. Gopi Janabalabha Girivardhari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunjavi Hari. Gopi Chana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Braja Jananjana. Yashodanandana Braja Jananjana. Yamunati Ramanachari. Yamunati Ramanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunjavi Hari. Gopichana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jananjana. Yamuna Tira Manachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjavi Hari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jananjana. Yamunati Ramanachari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunjavi Hari. Jai Radha Madhava Kunjavi Hari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Paravajakacharya Astu Shri Srimad Divine Grace Sri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Anant Kori Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Iskon Samstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhupada Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Shri Mayapur Navadvipadam Ki Shri Jagannath Puri Dham ki, Gangamai ki jai, Jamunmai ki jai, Tulsi Devi ki jai, Bhakti Devi ki jai, Samaveda Bhakti Vrinda ki jai. All glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees. Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bom. Namaste Krishna Krishna Bhutale Shri Bhaktivedanta Swami Nityanamane Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Namaste Saraswati Today's time. We're reading Canto 7, Chapter 1, Text 10. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yada Srikshu Pura Atmana Paro Raja Srijati Esha Pritak Svamayaya Sattvam Vichitrasu Viramshu Ishvara Shasishyam Manas Sayishyamanas Tama Irayati Aso Yadashisrikshu Pura Atmana Paro Raja Srijatyesha Pritak Swamayaya Sattvam Vichitrasu Viram Surishvara Shayishyamana Stama Irayatyaso Yada Shishrikshu Pura Atmanam Paro Rajasrijatyesha Pritak Swamayaya Sattvam Vichitrasu Viram Surishvara Shayishyam Manastama Irayatyaso. Yadashikshu Puratmana Paro Rajasrijatyesha Pritak Swamayaya Sattvam Vichitrasu Viram Surishvara Sayisyamanastama Irayatyaso. Yadashikshu Puratmana Paro Raja Sujati Shapitaksma Mayaya Satvam Vichitra Surimasurashvara Sishimanastama Irayatyaso. It is Yada Sikshu Puratmanaparo Rajasujatiye Shapitaksvamayaya Satvam Vichitra Suhiram Surishvara Sashishya Manastama Virayatyaso. Can you chant 1-9? Yadasa Sikshu Pura Atmana Paro. Second line. Rajasujati Shaprataksvamayaya Satvam Satvam Vichitra Surim Surishvaram Sasisya Manastama Iratyatyaso Yada. When Jayananda 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 Prabhu. There you go. Jayananda, do you want to come up front? It'll help you maybe stay attentive. Sisikshu, desiring to create pura, material bodies, atmana, for the living entities, para, Supreme Personality of Godhead,
the Supreme Personality of Godhead,
Raja, the mode of passion, Srijati, manifests, Isha, he, Pritak, separately, predominantly, Svamayaya, by his own creative energy, Sattvam, the mode of goodness, Vichitrasu, in various types of bodies, Viramshu, desiring to act, Ishvara, the personality of Godhead, Sayishyamanaha, being about to conclude. I took that to mean being about to end. So it has to do, I think, with tama, the next word. Tama means destruction. So things are brought to a conclusion, brought to an end. Tama, the mode of ignorance. Irayati, causes to rise. So that supreme. Translation: when the Supreme Personality of Godhead creates different types of bodies, offering a particular body to each living entity according to his character and fruitive actions, the Lord revives all the qualities of material nature, Sattva guna, Raja guna, and Tamo guna. It's an interesting verb, revives. The Lord revives all the qualities of material nature. That's his energy. So from time to time, he uses the energy, he revives the energy, and uses it to award or offer bodies. Then, as the Supersoul, he enters each body and influences the qualities of creation, maintenance, and annihilation, using Sattva guna for maintenance, Rajaguna for creation, and Tamo guna for annihilation. One of the points we'll come across here is that the individual soul has very little power because the Lord's energy is such a strong force. It creates the body of each living entity. And these bodies are influenced by the modes of nature. So that's the Supersoul's role, to oversee and conduct the qualities of nature. And the individual soul is kind of trapped inside the whole thing. Doesn't have much power. Purport: although material nature is conducted by the three qualities, Sattva guna, Rajaguna, and Tamoguna, nature is not independent. As the Lord says in Bhagavad Gita 9:10, Maya Dyakshena Prakriti Suyate Satcharacharam Itu Na Nena Konteya Jagat Viparivartate. This material nature is working under my direction, and it is producing all moving and unmoving beings. By its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So this makes us think about something beyond just the world that we live in. It makes us think about the repetition of the creation and annihilation of the world, which happens again and again. And as we were saying, the living entities caught within this creation. And even if he lives in 8,400,000 species in one creation, he may repeat that whole process of accepting all those species again in another creation. It's that thick, that strong, this creative force. The different changes in the world, in the material world, take place as actions and reactions of the three gunas. But above the three gunas is their director, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In the various types of bodies given to the living entities by material nature, yantra means machine or body. Yantra or rudani means placed on the machine. Maya, under the spell of Maya. I'm under a spell in this machine. This is the soul, its position. Soul's in the machine. So in this condition, either sattva-gun, rajagun, or tamagun is prominent. The body is produced by material nature according to the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, it's said here, Yadasya Shikshu Pura Atmana Para. That's the first line of the verse today, indicating that the body is certainly created by the Lord. It's said that the Lord desires to create different bodies, different types of bodies. Karmana Daiva Netrena. According to the karma of the living entity, a body is prepared under the Supreme Lord's supervision. Whether the body is of sattva-gun, raja-gun, or tamo-gun, everything is done by the direction of the Supreme Lord through the agency of the external energy. Pratiksvamaya. That's also in the verse today. By his creative energy, swamayaya, swa means his, mayaya, energy, swamayaya, his creative energy, pritak, separately, predominantly. The energy is his agent. It's working for the Lord. So there's the agency, the Maya, and the Lord. Whether the body is made of sattva-gun, rajagun, or tamagun, everything is done by the direction of the Lord through the agency of the external energy, pritak svamayaya. In this way, in different types of bodies, the Lord Ishvara gives direction as Paramatma. And again, to destroy the body, he employs the tamo gun. This is the way the living entities receive different types of bodies. Jnanavarandasya Jnanantanakshalaprakasyamilitam Yena Tasma Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Mano Vishnu Enam Bhutale Swayam Rupakada Mayam Dadati Swam Nantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapada Kamalam Shri Guru Vaishnava Shigupam Sagajatam Savagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Savetam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakan Vitam Hare Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurani Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Supadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Panchakopatarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyeva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The verse again. Yadasya Sikshu Pura Atmana Paro Raja Srijatye Sapitsamaya Satam Vichitrasu Viram Surishvara Sayishyamanastamad Hirayatyasu. So this verse in purport tells us that the Lord acts and directs and desires to create bodies for the living entities. And then he also destroys those bodies and the creation. So this is not something that's taught to people who live in cultures where the Bhagavatam and the Bhagavad Gita are not known. They'll hear about the creation of the body of a living entity. They'll hear that the parents create the body and the baby is born. And there's not much more that they know. The baby becomes a child, becomes a young person, an adult, an old person, and then dies. But the background, the modes of nature under the direction of the Lord, that's not taught except in the Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam. Maybe the Bible, the Old Testament, maybe the Quran says something about the energy of the Lord that creates these bodies of the living entities. I'm not sure. But certainly not extensively. I mean, here you have a book, 900-page book, discussing the details. So by Srila Prabhupada's mercy and by his endeavor, the knowledge is coming to us. Same knowledge that Parikshit Maharaj received when he was at the point of his death. He gave up his kingdom. He gave up the ruling of his kingdom. He wasn't an old man, but he gave up the throne. And some people were concerned. The king has given up ruling the kingdom. Could this be inauspicious for us? The people in the kingdom no longer will have Maharaj Parikshit on the throne. Who will protect the people if Maharaj Parikshit dies? Well, the people in Vrindavan, some of the people in Vrindavan that I know, my Ayurvedic doctor told me about this. He lives in Vrindavan. He said, the people in Vrindavan say that the protection of Maharaj Parikshit didn't end when he left the throne to hear the Srimad Bhagavatam. Because by hearing the Bhagavatam, this led to the recording of the conversation between Shukadeva and Parikshit by Srila Vyasadeva. He wrote it down as the Srimad Bhagavatam. And now it's been translated into many languages by Srila Prabhupada and his disciples. So the same protection of Maharaj Parikshit is still available. Maharaj Parikshit is protecting all the living entities by hearing the Bhagavatam. He's offering the living entities the supreme shelter of the personality of Godhead by hearing the Bhagavatam. And Shukadeva is chanting. Shukadeva is offering the message of Bhagavatam to Parikshit, and that process protects Parikshit, and in turn it protects all the living entities that otherwise Parikshit would have protected physically, but now the protection is in the form of the Vani. Shishiko Lanitai Mayapushashi. Kiyaja. So we come under the shelter of the Vaishnavas, Shukadeva Goswami and Maharaj Parikshit, when we discuss the Bhagavatam. In that way, we're connected with something old, something ancient, and something that's the supreme truth. Satyam Param Dhimahi, we're meditating on the personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. Ultimately, in the 10th canto, the pastimes of Krishna are narrated. But here in the 7th canto, we're discussing how the Supreme Lord is equal to everyone. And that's being explained to us in these purports. The other day, when you gave class, Prabhupada Pranad, there was a reference to the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14, which is about the modes of nature. The point was that everyone enjoys the fruits of their activities in the modes of nature. According to the modes of nature, one gets certain results. So Prabhupada in the purport quoted 3 verses from the Gita. About the mode of goodness and about the mode of passion and the mode of ignorance. The manifestation of the modes of goodness can be experienced when one has knowledge. Goodness is another word for illumination or enlightenment. Illumination gives rise to knowledge. Goodness gives rise to knowledge. The gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge when one is in the mode of goodness. That's what Krishna says. You can experience the mode of goodness when the gates of the body are illuminated by knowledge. So that means the senses that are senses of perception, one's seeing, one's hearing, one's smelling, one's tasting. When one is in contact with sense objects that are transcendental, then the gates of the body are illuminated by transcendental knowledge. Honoring prasadam is, in one sense, an experience of transcendental knowledge. You're tasting the remnants offered to Goda Nitai, Mayapur Shashi. So the tongue and the mouth are illuminated by a kind of knowledge of tasting. The Bhagavatam also tells us that these tastes come from the earth. The element of earth contains and produces these tastes that we experience. So we can learn about the elements, the tastes, the process of offering to the Lord. There was a verse about offering prasadam. Krishna accepts the prasadam, the offering of the devotee. Why? Because he likes to be dependent on his devotee. He likes when his devotee, like Mother Yashoda, offers something to him to eat. So that's his mercy. It's not that he's dependent on the devotee. He's independent. But he likes to assume the attitude of being dependent on his devotee. That's his mercy. It's not that he's partial to the devotee. This is a point that's made. There's no question of partiality. So it's not that he's partial to the devotee, but he likes to feel dependent on his devotee. And in friendship, he acts in friendship with Arjuna. He likes that feeling that Arjuna is my friend and I'm Arjuna's friend. That's his mercy on the devotee. But the Lord doesn't need Arjuna's help. The Lord doesn't need his mother's help. But he acts like a human being who needs these things. So, go back just once more to the Bhagavad Gita, these verses about goodness, passion, and ignorance. When there's the mode of passion, the symptoms of attachment develop, uncontrollable desire develops, hankering develops, and intense endeavor develops in the mode of passion. Srila Rupa Goswami talks about controlling the urges of the body, Vachubhegam, Manasa, Krodabhegam. So if you eat too much, your desire will become uncontrollable because your stomach will be so full that there will be downward pressure, and then the lower senses below the tongue and the stomach, there are the genitals. So the genitals will be agitated. That's explained by the nectar of instruction. You'll develop uncontrollable desire. You won't be able to control that desire. Similarly, you can develop great attachment in the mode of passion, great hankering, intense endeavor. Then the third verse in the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita about the mode of ignorance. Oh, it really gets bad. The mode of ignorance manifests madness, illusion, inertia, and darkness. So people really fall into a very bad situation in the mode of ignorance. And of course, it includes intoxication. People can become quite self-destructive if they're influenced by madness and illusion and ignorance, darkness. When I was in college, I had attended a class given by a really famous poet. I didn't know his poetry. I had not read his books when I enrolled in the class. He was just there to teach the seniors. It was a senior class. And it was an honors class. It was for students who were doing well academically. And it was a class on the American character. What is the American character? You could have a class here, what is the Scottish character? You would study Scottish literature, you would study Scottish heroes, and you would be able to discuss that. The Indian heroes, there are heroes in India who fought battles, and they're remembered. So American character was the topic of this class, so I enrolled in that. I didn't know too much about the teacher. As I said, I didn't know about his poetry. I just knew that he had become famous as a poet. And I can just sum up the 4 or 5 months that I took his class. First thing that you noticed about him was that he was a chain smoker. So that's self-destructive behavior. It's bad enough to smoke. Cigarettes kill you, but to smoke one cigarette after another, what is going on? As soon as he puts out a cigarette, he would light another one. What was going on? I couldn't understand it. So I tried it myself to see if, there was is there something to that? Maybe I should. Then I learned that he was a very intelligent teacher. Prabhupada said the intellectuals in Kali Yuga, they're certainly very intelligent, but he would speak about books that we were reading. We had to read some of the great American novels, like The Scarlet Letter. Have you heard of that? Okay. Have you heard of the book called The American by Henry James? He was an American who lived in France, and he wrote novels there in France. And he wrote one book about an American who visited France. And each of the students had to read a novel and give a report on it. There were only, I think, 18 of us in the class. I was assigned to read and report on this novel, The American by Henry James. And during my presentation to the class, I sat at the head of the seminar table. And actually, without even planning to do so, I just imitated what Berryman did. I lit a cigarette, started talking, used my notes, and as soon as my cigarette went out, I lit another one. And then I realized, my God, I'm imitating Berryman while I'm doing this. And he noticed it also. And so did the students. It was just a strange thing, you know, you act like the people you associate with. So then at one point I asked him to write a letter of recommendation for graduate school. I was applying to graduate school. I needed some recommendations from professors. So he wrote a letter. And then Christmas came along. The fall term was over. Christmas came along. We had a break. And as we were getting back into classes in January, at the very beginning of January, a girl that I knew said to me, "Did you hear what happened to your Professor Berryman?" I said, "No, what happened?" "He jumped off a bridge. He killed himself." So this was quite a shock to us. And within a few days, I went to the funeral. And then I began to read some of the articles that were coming out about this. And I began to learn more about his personal history. And then I began to read some of his poetry to understand what he had written about, what his concerns were as a writer, how he had become famous as a writer. And I began to think, you know, I'm applying to graduate school. I'm thinking maybe I'll become an academic or a scholar. And if I follow this path, will I become like him? Will I become dissatisfied? Will I become disappointed in life so much that I take my own life? Maybe I shouldn't go to graduate school. Maybe this isn't the right path to go. Maybe you should become more serious about spiritual life. So he actually had a big influence on me. And the first article I wrote for Back to Godhead was all about Professor Berryman and how I reevaluated my direction in life and took to the direction of Krishna consciousness because I met the devotees on the university campus and I began to learn about Krishna consciousness. So my direction in life changed. And then when I joined, well, just before I joined ISKCON, I met another devotee I met a devotee who was a writer, and I met another devotee who was an editor, Satsvarup Das Goswami and Jayadvaita. He was still a brahmachari. They were writing and editing Back to Godhead. So they were somewhat sympathetic to me because they understood that, you know, I had a bachelor's degree and I didn't go to graduate school, and I was interested in books and I was interested in some scholarly endeavors. And within a year of my joining ISKCON, I was helping Satsvarup Goswami write his first book called Readings in Vedic Literature. I was doing research on his book, Readings in Vedic Literature. This was a book he wrote for students, Readings in Vedic Literature, meant to help college students understand Vedic culture. He wrote 8 essays in this book, 8 essays. And then he included the Bhagavad Gita in the book. And I was doing research on what the scholars said about Vedic culture. And then giving this research to Satsvarup Das Goswami, and he was writing that such and such scholar says this, and that's true what he says, or such and such scholar says this, and it's not true what he says. He's misunderstood. So the book was like that. And then this led, eventually to my being on the Back to Godhead staff. For 5 years, I learned how to become an editor. And now I'm producing these books. It's called Communications Journal. This is a book that contains articles by scholarly devotees and also outside scholars. And the purpose is stated here. It's very briefly stated. It's like a mission statement. It's a journal for dialogue with outsiders, like other religionists, politicians, journalists. You can have dialogue with outsiders. And it's also a journal for reflection. It focuses on issues related to ISKCON. The journal presents the society's values and understandings on a variety of topics to the general public, while also promoting internal analysis among its membership. So it's a journal for reflection. Devotees can read and reflect. So this is a result of my taking shelter of Srila Prabhupada. We received the Hare Krishna mantra in ISKCON, and this is our training to chant the mantra. Day by day, we learn that we have to chant a certain amount. I was explaining to a volunteer, Alex, the Italian volunteer, that I chant on my beads, and I measure the number of rounds, and he was kind of amazed that we chant for 2 to 3 hours a day on our beads. He said, "How long have you been doing that?" And I said, "Almost 50 years." And he was just so surprised that we spend so much time chanting. But this is the training for devotees, because we're preparing for the time of death. At the time of death, we'll be engaged in chanting or hearing the holy names, and we'll go back to Godhead. Yesterday, I took a short walk to town. I had to buy something in the pharmacy, and I visited the big park. I was chanting some japa there. And just last Saturday, when I went to Edinburgh, Leela Manjari drove the car past this park. It was filled with people. It was some spring holiday. What's it called? Highland Games, right? Then I saw a video, I think a devotee, Bhakti Vinod put up a video of some man carrying a log. He's kind of like holding this huge log. It's 3-4 times his height, and he's holding it in his hands, very strong. And then he runs, and at some point he flips the log, and the log is supposed to, turn over something that falls on the ground. So what's that? That's the mode of passion. The crowd is there. People are gathered together. Mode of ignorance to some extent. What's the point? And I was there doing my japa, so that's transcendental, to chant near the forest. And then there were also some people exercising in the park, or also with their dogs. Their dogs were also exercising. They throw the ball and the dog chases the ball. So the dog gets good exercise, and the people are out walking. So these verses are about being under the spell of goodness and passion and ignorance, and covered by the energy of the Lord. The energy is broken down. There's 5 gross energies. There's 3 subtle energies. Then there are the 10 senses, knowledge acquiring, working senses. And the total cause is the Mahatattva. So we hear about this. And it's explained that we're getting the opportunity to perform different types of karma, different types of activities. And this takes different types of thinking and feeling and willing to perform different karma, different types of karma. One person is thinking in a certain way, feeling in a certain way, willing in a certain way. According to the modes, one and how he's going to act, his thinking and feeling and willing are of a certain type. And then the body is working. The machine of the body is being used in this work. So the Supreme Lord is the controller of all this energy that everybody's working with. The Lord is the controller of the machines, the bodies. He's the controller of the modes. But the living entity, here's a good contrast. I mentioned it at the beginning. The Lord controls all of this energy, and the living entity is only the controller, the master of his particular body. But he can't control the pains and pleasures that he's subject to as a result of his activities. He has to experience 3 types of miseries. So he's suffering. The living entity, here's another verse. The living entity tries to achieve happiness and rid him. What happened? What happened? Oh, the door opened. The door fell open. Something. Yeah. I saw that the other day, that it was kind of hanging there. So the living entity tries to achieve happiness and rid himself of the causes of distress. But because the various bodies of the living entities are under the full control of material nature, all his plans are ultimately baffled. Can you repeat that verse that I just said? The living entity tries to achieve happiness and rid himself of the causes of distress. But because the various bodies of the living entities are under the full control of material nature, all his plans in different bodies, one after another, are ultimately baffled. So I'll stop there. Funny, isn't it? Nice going, living entity. Nice going. Slow clap for the living entities. There's one statement in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna says, you're the controller, but you're the creator and the controller, but all you can create is your suffering. That's all you create. You think you're the actor, the creator, but you're just creating suffering. questions, comments, please? Yeah, they're quite aware that they're suffering. Sure. Yeah. Well, there's nothing else. Suffering is all they have. So suffering is very popular. Yes. And they have to somehow celebrate it because they can creatively celebrate it. Of course, his books, his suffering was caused by, being in the modes of passion and ignorance. He was an alcoholic. And as I said, he was a chain smoker. And also, he was tasting the suffering of adultery in the 10th canto, where Krishna's pastimes with the gopis are mentioned. It said that anyone who tries to imitate the Lord and dance with others' wives will taste the bitterest taste. This adultery might seem very pleasant, it's in the mode of passion, might seem very enjoyable in the beginning, but the taste is like poison at the end. So Berryman tasted this poison of affairs with other men's wives. And cigarette smoking is certainly not going to make one happy. Chain smoking. Alcoholism is not going to make one happy. He spent time in the hospital recovering from alcoholic. He went for treatments to cure alcohol or get rid of alcoholic problems. And there was a group called Alcoholics Anonymous that he enrolled in. And they help people by bringing God into the helping situation. They try to get you to depend on God to solve this problem. So at one point, Berryman wrote some poetry in praise of God based on, trying to rely on God to help him overcome alcoholic. He did a lot of exploration of religion. I mean, he was quite a thinker, and he thought a lot about what religion has to offer people and whether he could follow a religion and so on. And in my article that I wrote for Back to Godhead, I discussed some of those points. Okay, we stop there. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. Glories to Srila Prabhupada.